It's video. Look, there's a lot of video in this video. It goes all here. All right. So, it's currently Seattle winter. Gets dark at 4 p.m. It's rainy. Actually, there's a sunbeam outside, so I will be right back. Okay, and I saw some daylight. Went out and I scanned these sticks, which will be useful for a thing I'm working on. I'll show you in a bit. I saw the sunbeam hit the old theater that closed down during COVID. Got some groceries, had a little lunch. Now let's make a video, and I'm stalling because it is the dark time of year. It's winter in Seattle, which means it gets, sun goes down at 4 p.m. And so I'm just kind of like every day I put myself in front of the computer and just kind of start poking at little stuff. I've been going through still linearizing a lot of old things. Most times you can't tell at all. It looks basically exactly the same. But other times it's like there's shots that I was working on for days being like, why can't I make this look right? Because I'm trying to make sure the environment match the footage. And once I replaced the footage with like a proper linearized element, suddenly everything else kind of popped into place in like 2 minutes. And so that's always nice when that happens. But in general, honestly, just a little bit some winter burnout. So I've got this shot coming up right here, right after this. And it's one of those big shots that I've done in the past. You just start somewhere and you keep going. But the problem is that I want it to be all of these different vignettes, like, tiny little bar or market here, and like I want this little thing happening down here. I thought it'd be fun if there'd be all of these different people in these apartment buildings, like projecting a movie on this giant wall there, but that means I've got to make all those different people and their apartment interiors and the movie that's showing and stuff going off to the horizon. And I just keep not knowing how to start. And it's a 35-second shot, and so it's worth putting some time into. Actually, I did a different 30-second shot yesterday. It's a first pass of trying to see this monster congealing, and I think for a test it worked out really good. And it's got a little bit of that rigid body bullet physics jitter, but I think with a kind of sound design, kind of like a rattlesnake thing, might actually be kind of cool. So all of these sticks are currently placeholders. That's what I was scanning the other sticks for. That'll be fun. What I like about this is the actual shot is like 30 plus seconds long, but the audience and the character are both watching the same thing kind of in real time, being like, what is going on here? I think it's gonna be cool. So anyways, I'm still babbling and stalling, but long story short, the reason I did this shot is because it's fun to let the rigid body physics do all the work. And I have this other shot, this other sequence that I did. Do you remember a couple months ago when I was like, oh, we'll finish this shot sometime soon? We still will. It'll be great. But yeah, I worked on this shot, which is, again, just more rigid body physics, crashing into stuff. I did some cloth physics, some particle things. So I thought today, let's do a shot kind of like that, showing the car blasting through a random stall. The joke is kind of, as the scene goes, you realize the taxi's kind of intentionally going out of its way to crash through as much stuff as possible. So I thought a few quick shots of showing it smashing through just like annoying things, like, a booth full of china, like fine china, or bells, or like cymbals or something like that. Just each one being more loud and annoying. I think we kind of drive that joke home a little further. So let's go through all these different physics systems. Because the thing about Blender's different physics systems, they're all kind of were designed separately 15, 20 years ago, and you can kind of use them together a little bit sometimes, but each one stores its cache separately. Each one, they all have their different quirks, so that's going to be what I try to get through today. It's all going to be fairly basic stuff, but when rigid body physics are working, they're very fun. And the funnest thing to do with rigid bodies is drive a car through a bunch of boxes, so that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to start kind of cheating using the RBC car rigging animation plugin, just because it's very fun. And you can do it with the little controller. I don't know. I think there's a free version. I don't know if you can do the controller in the free version, but yeah, it's he's put a lot of work into it. I love it. We could just animate it with a couple keyframes, like a noise modifier, and get the same result. But gonna create a quick road with a couple little bumps in it, just to keep things kind of interesting here. And let's see if it works. Go. Feels like we're going kind of slow. Go. Oh yeah, this is it. Yeah. If you're not making sound effects, have you really animated? I'm gonna save this current cache. I'm going to bake it to keyframes. And if we look from the side view, oh, that works great. Okay, I'm gonna hide some of this extra stuff here, put that in the hidden folder, and I'm gonna quickly simplify this. Right now, this whole piece is a collision object, which we'll talk more about in a second, but I'm just gonna get it a little bit more stripped down here. Maybe extrude it into a little bit of a building here. We'll have like a little alleyway kind of going off into the distance. Do the same thing here. Maybe have this kind of leaning out a little bit, like it's kind of a window box or something like that. Cool. All right. So let's start modeling our booth real fast. I don't think I'm gonna have my booth be destructible. I think he's gonna drive kind of right between the supports of the booth here. I'll show you. So there we go. Okay, it goes right between the legs. Gonna save that. So let's talk rigid body physics real fast. It's useful for simulating obviously rigid body non-deforming objects. If you've got a big pile of something or want to simulate a bunch of different things, but it does have a few different quirks. So I'm going to scale up a ground here, and the first thing I like to give the ground, instead of just having it be a flat plane, I want to actually have it be solid, so that when it's trying to calculate intersections and stuff, it's harder for it to just pass through and be like, oh, I guess I'm on this side. It's like actually got some thickness to it. I'm also going to a lot of times hit Control A and apply the scale, just to make sure that all the physics actually know how big the object actually is. So the rigid body panel is under the physics panel here. We're gonna click rigid body, and there's two types. There's active and there's passive. Passive objects can still interact with all of the physics, but they're not gonna be doing anything. So the ground will be passive, but if we add another cube here, scale it down, Control A, apply the scale, give it a weird rotation, make it a rigid body that's active with dynamic checked. If we hit play, it falls like a real box. That's really cool. And as it plays, you can see it's creating this little orange bar down here at the bottom, and that's it saving the animation data to the cache. In the cache, how do you describe a cache? It's a little file that's made that exists either within the blend file itself or in the folder that the blend file is saved in, if it's like, you know, a big one like a fluid sim or something like that, that stores all the animation data, but not like in keyframes or anything. It's just this other separate way of storing animation data. And so the first time you hit play, everything might go kind of slow as it's trying to calculate the simulation, but after that, everything is loaded in the cache and you should be able to just scrub around really, really fast. But you'll notice if we change something, that bar changes colors, and if we hit play, it has to recalculate, regenerate the cache. And right now, every time we change anything, it deletes the cache, which can be kind of annoying. But we can bake the cache and say, this is the simulation that we want, keep this forever. And for rigid body physics, we actually do this under the scene tab, which is a little bit confusing. If we click scene, here's rigid body world, and if we go down to cache, we can either click bake to bake it between this frame range from scratch, or we can say current cache to bake, which means we'll just save whatever the cache is currently doing. I feel like there's a better way to describe all that, but I can't think of it at the moment. But yeah, we've got other settings here for like the speed of the physics and when the simulation starts and ends, or the the number of substeps per frame. I'm just reading through all the buttons here. But why is the rigid body cache here in the scene tab instead of over in the physics tab? It's because typically when you're doing a rigid body sim, you have a lot of different objects involved, and so you don't want to be baking each object independently. You want to just do it all kind of globally. It's that's the only reason why. Cloth sim, if you do a cloth sim, you'll notice it has the cache down here on a per object level. But that's because usually if you're doing a cloth sim, you just have a singular object. And the biggest thing that affects the responsiveness of a rigid body simulation is the calculation of all of the collisions. And so you have a bunch of different controls for that. Here, I'm going to inset the top of this box, extrude it down, and let's create a monkey head right here. Scale that, apply both of those scales with Control A. If we make this a rigid body passive, so it's not going to be doing anything, and we make this an active rigid body, and we hit play, you'll notice it just stops on top of the box. And that's because by default, Blender calculates the collisions of the rigid bodies using convex hull as the shape. And that you can think of as being like a shrink wrap, like kind of as if it's in a balloon that's kind of sucking in. And it's a clever optimization because it means it only really cares about the outer points. It's ignoring everything that's happening inside of the object. It just means if you have a case like this, the monkey does not fall inside the box unless we change the shape to mesh itself, and then Well, let's redo the cache here. And the monkey goes in the box. That's great. Oh, and a thing to know, when you have cache data, you really want to go back to frame 0 because that means you're modifying the starting position of everything as opposed to like trying to work within the cache. So we're going to go back to frame 0, set up a new kind of thing here. I'm going to have the monkey like this, and then I'm going to make it passive and have another one up here that's active and smaller. And if we drop it right there, you'll see it won't go all the way down. It'll go to like this point here that's shrink wrapped around the entire monkey. Go to frame 0. Or nothing will happen at all. Why do you think that is? Let's go under the rigid body settings here and just delete all bakes and see if that fixes it. It doesn't. So I'm going to create a new monkey because my guess is this is a little problem in Blender that is using the original state of the monkey, and if we just make a new one and say you're active, there it all works and it lands on that invisible kind of thing. So that's just kind of a thing to know. So you might be thinking, why not change everything, all the collisions to mesh? And that's because just things get really slow really fast. You really want those optimizations. All right, so that's most of what you need to know about rigid body physics. So if we go back here, and I'm realizing I built this scene sideways. I like to have it so when I hit 1, I'm looking kind of straight at the shot from like the camera's point of view, but in this case, it's actually looking down the road, which means I always have to go to the side view to get the front view, which is gonna throw off my muscle memory a little bit. But here, let's bring a person in, dude. And this dude exists at proper scale in Blender units, but you'll notice he looks far too small compared to the taxi, and that's because when I first rigged up the taxi, I rigged it up at the wrong scale, and instead of fixing it, I've just been modeling every single scene in this sequence to S1.3 times the size of usual. Oh, you can also see this is the auto-generated shrink-wrapped kind of collision cage for the car. The RBC automatically generates. But yeah, let's put this guy back here in his little booth, and let's just model everything to his scale. So let's create a little table here out of a cube. Scale it down. This will be like kind of a low table. We'll have kind of like a tiered kind of thing going on. So this will be the front one, and then we'll duplicate this. We'll kind of make it some little table legs also going down into the bottom. And I'm going to be applying physics to this. So I'm trying to keep all the cubes from intersecting if I can. Here we'll have it go down to the ground and maybe, taper it just a little bit. And bring that over. Bring both of these to the other side. So we could just go into our physics tab, rigid body, make it active, and when the car comes and hits it, blast it out of the way. That's excellent. But I want it to fall into tiny little parts, or at least I want its legs to pop off. So I'm going to tab back into edit mode, select everything, and hit P, separate by loose parts. Now if we go back into object mode, you'll see each object, each part is its own object. We can select all of them, right click, and change the origin to be in the center of the object, because that's the assumed center of gravity. Now ideally, all of these should just explode and fall apart. That's perfect, except we don't actually want it to do that before the car hits it. So we're gonna change one thing here. I'm gonna go under the physics tab and under, what is it, sensitivity? Dynamics. Deactivation, yes, I'm gonna check deactivation down here, and I'm gonna check start deactivated, and that means it's not gonna do anything until something else affects it. So I'm going to select all these other objects here, select the one we've modified last, and if I hit F3, copy rigid body settings, whatever settings we have on this object will be applied to everything else, and we're gonna be doing that quite a bit. But ideally, that means now when we hit play, nothing happens, but the moment the car hits it, Great, okay. But it's all right. In fact, maybe we shrink this one piece down here, apply the scale, and we'll just have 2 of them, so it kind of like even falls in half. And I love the start deactivated option because it opens a lot of doors. For example, let's say you have a box like this. We make it an active rigid body, and we fill it with a bunch of little boxes of something. Here, we'll make this a rigid body object 2, filling it with a lot of different things, and because all this stuff's intersecting, when they calculate the collisions, it should explode. Like, remember, because right now this is convex hull, that means all of these objects think they're intersecting the box and the physics should go haywire. In fact, here, let's just see what that looks like really fast. If we select all these boxes and copy the rigid body settings of this, when we hit play, it all just explodes. But if we start deactivated here and hit F3, copy rigid body settings, they'll just stay under tension until the moment the car hits them. And then they explode and go every which way. And that's something I actually used quite a bit in that scene where the car is driving around. All of those things it's hitting are just a bunch of little boxes packed into a larger box, so everything's going off like popcorn. Oh, also, I knew people would be like, why aren't the candles affected by the car driving by? So I filmed the candle and blew on it like 20 times and synced it all up, which worked really well because I was able to use one video texture for all the different candles. And so this is a short video with that little gust at the beginning, but I should make an asset of just a grid of 30 different candles all flickering on their own timing, because it's a really nice way to add a lot of different flames without having to, you know, do a bunch of stuff. Everything's going a little bit fast, and so I can actually just change all of the physics globally right here under speed. I think what I'd want to do is change it down to like 0.6, right? Let's see how that goes. Or maybe more like 0.7. Cool. Although I think it's weird the cubes hit and just like don't bounce or anything. So I'm gonna try turning up the bounciness of the ground here under collision surface response. I'll change that to 1. Let's select these boxes here. Make one of them be very bouncy. I actually haven't played around with the bounciness setting. We'll see if it actually does anything. Select everything else, hit F3, copy those rigid body settings, and do they get a little bouncier? Oh, yeah, they do. Oh, they're very bouncy. Okay, so maybe we split the difference there. Whoa, it's going higher each time. It should be a bouncy ball booth. No, let's turn the bounciness down to like 0.4. And look, this is what working with physics is. You reset the parameters, you change the variables, you try simulating it again, and you kind of see how it looks. Like that cube is just rolling away. And usually when a cube is rolling, that means I have to apply the scale because it's like calculating the inertia of a larger object against a smaller one, like I think. So the cube is spinning, and yeah, it comes to rest a little bit faster. So apply those scales. So what is this booth going to be selling? We need a joke. Unfortunately, I don't really have any jokes right now, so let's go find one. Let's go to the dark woods. There are no jokes here. There's nothing at all. What is that? What is that? Oh, there's a joke! What if it were a booth of pre-assembled houses of cards? Maybe. I mean, I like the idea of the symbols. It's just all these symbols hanging and the card just goes it is just the most annoying sound in the entire world. Or like rubber ducks or like rubber chickens. So just anyways, we'll figure that out in a second. First, let's create kind of a canopy around this booth. So I'm going to create a plane up here, make sure it's not intersecting anything. And I'm just gonna model it the way I kind of want the cloth to be. I'm going to try to keep like the mesh fairly equidistant, like the distance between vertices to be the same between everything, but it's not super duper important. So once I have it like this, I'm gonna try to just use Control R to add a bunch more geometry, splitting everything up into something that kind of resembles squares. And I should probably be using way more geometry than this, but at the same time, this is going to keep everything nice and responsive, and it's not like the cloth sim is really going to make or break the entire shot, probably. And we could try to make it so that the cloth sim interacts with this framework here and it's actually draped on it, but one thing the cloth sims are particularly bad at is trying to drape on really thin stuff, and so instead, I'm just going to pin the edges of this cloth sim so that they're not involved in the simulation. So I'm going to select all the bits that I want resting on something there, and this other side too. And under the data properties, we're going to create a new vertex group. We can call it whatever we want. This will be the pinned bits, the pinned berts. Assign all of the selected edges to that group. And now if we go back into our physics tab, go into the cloth settings, it's already trying to fall because we're on frame 17. Let's go back to frame 0. And if we go down under shape here, we can select our pin group, which is going to be the Berts. So now if we hit play, there we go. It's calculating our whole cloth here. And this bit has tension under it. Cloth simulations work best when you have some sort of thing pulling on it. But here, because everything is just hanging down to the ground, it's in perfect equilibrium. So I might introduce a little bit of randomness there. I don't even know if this will work, but max shrinking, where is it? Right here, shrinking factor. Let's try putting this like 0.05 and see what it does. Okay, yeah, that just kind of makes it a little bit more wrinkly. In fact, let's go back to frame 0, turn on proportional editing. I'm gonna select these bottom edges here and just pull them all down a tad because I want the car to actually run into them. And right now it's kind of intersecting through these poles here, so I'm gonna delete them. Yeah, okay, no one will notice. And right now, I think it might be confusing that we're using this weird RBC car to power all these other physics. So I'm going to create my own little collider object here, line it up with the car, and I'm going to bake some animation onto it. So I'm modeling my low poly collision object just by hand. I'm going to parent it to the car here, and now I can make this object a rigid body. And this might be a little confusing, but I just want to get the car out of here for now. I want this cube doing the car's motion. We can calculate all of our physics with this kind of placeholder cube, and then at the end for the final render, we'll bring our entire car in. But it's just a lot to look at right now. And right now our cube is parented to the car, but I don't even want it parented. I want it totally its own thing. So we are gonna bake the cache from just being a random, inaccessible animation file to actually being keyframes we can modify. Because like, say we wanted to tweak the location of the car or something. We can't, because it's all saved in this black box of the cache. But if we bake it to keyframes, we've got all our usual, here, I'll show you. Let's say we have this spinning cube here, and it's just gonna be spinning forever. And then we parent this cube to that cube, which means even though this cube doesn't have any keyframes, it's still spinning. But that means this cube doing what it's doing is totally dependent on this cube. And if we ever want to tweak this or change something, this cube will be totally different. So what we can do is we can say object animation bake action. It gives us all of these different options. We want to do object here. We want to clear constraints, clear parents, visual keying. I don't actually, some of these seem a little redundant to me, but let's say okay. It's gonna think for a second, and now you can see the cube is doing the exact same motion, but it's doing it by being keyframed instead of being parented. It doesn't care what this cube is. In fact, we can delete this cube and this will still be doing the exact same thing because it's got all these keyframes. And we could open up the graph editor here and we could play around with whatever we wanted. We could use proportional editing to like pull it in a weird direction or something, however we wanted. And this is kind of how you get the best of both worlds. You can do your simulations, you can turn it back into keyframes, you can do all of this stuff. So let's do that in our other file. Select our object, animation, bake action, clear constraints and parents, visual keying, and let's go to like frame 300. I think is about as long as the shot's actually going to be. Say okay. It thinks for a while. Is Blender crashed? Is it just thinking? You have no way of knowing. Alright, good. And that means now I can take all of this stuff here, put it in our hidden folder, and now we just have our totally new, unique cube here, doing its own thing, ignoring the other car completely. And you might be wondering, because I'm wondering, what was the point of any of that? Why did we bake that down? Well, it's because I couldn't get the other car to interact with the cloth for some reason. Even this was parented to the other car, it wasn't affecting this cloth simulation. And my only guess is that there's some weird order of operations. Like Blender calculates one thing, and then it calculates the next thing. So like when it's calculating the cloth, it isn't taking into account the position of the car or something like that. But now that it's its own thing, I'm hoping I can just check collision here, and everything will interact the way it's supposed to. And it does! Okay, that's great. So it's just a thing I do. When in doubt, I will bake all of the objects down to their keyframes. It's a bummer because it's kind of like destructive. It means it's a lot harder to go back and rebake the rigid body simulation, which means I kind of calculate things in order. First, I try to lock down the car animation, and then I'll lock down the animation of the big objects, and I'll kind of keep getting more and more granular. So remember, the cloth's cache settings are actually in the cloth physics tab, just down here. And so let's make it be 300 frames long. We're gonna bake it. And here, let's right click, shade smooth. yeah, that looks okay. A lot of times I'll do my cloth sim a little bit too low res, but then at the end I'll apply a subdivision surface on the top of it, and that just makes it look a lot nicer. Now I'm kicking myself a little bit because if you already know all of this stuff, this video might make sense, but then, you know, it's kind of useless. And if you don't, I'm jumping between baking keyframes and rigid body stuff and cloth sims and everything kind of interchangeably. I don't think I figured out the right order to introduce all of the information. I kind of thought making the booth would kind of dictate that chronology, but it didn't.
So then, he spent the next 20 minutes making a mini version of the tutorial inside the longer tutorial, which he should have learned by now never actually works.
Let's go see what Lex is up to.
Lex, I'm coming up!
Alright.
Alright.
What are you doing?
Well, so we've got this old prop that originally was going to be the, like, cash register inside the taxi, but that's one of Ian's digital assets now, so I'm retrofitting it to be a miniature record player. But yeah, this has just been a week of me on Arduino, and I have all the electronics components finished as of this morning. Basically, you're going to have a keypad here on the front of the device, and you can just pick a song, any sort you want. Head will go over and pick whichever disc has popped out, and then voila, it's playing some random space nonsense.
It's a little practical. Can you show the so it's set up so that you can actually put in a disc on the keypad. Here, baby, do it.
Great. So yeah, you pick a disc here. Your selection shows up here.
And you click the
and
button.
When you hit the go button,
and it goes. Oh, that's so cool. all right. I'm back to it. I'm back.
Oh, that's cool. That looks like a good time. It's going to be a practical, small kind of desktop version of that large jukebox that was in that one scene that where Sterling walks into the bar. I'm really excited to see it finalized. I'm gonna lay down on my couch for a second.
You can do it, honey. The rocket launch, you won't explode.
This is my closet with all the modern amenities. Is a light switch an amenity? What is an amenity? An amenity sounds like a better name for like a replicant in Blade Runner. I deactivate the amenities.
All that to say, the rule I've been living by this last week is it's better to do something than nothing. And so failing in making a proper physics video, and I'm gonna cut you off right there, Pastian, because this video actually turns out, I think, not that bad. He goes off and he does a thing for a second, but yeah, there's really only a couple more things I wanted to say. The first one is, since each physics system is kind of a different solution to a different problem, it's hard to get them to play nice, like, together. Like, you can have one physics system sometimes affect a second one, but that second one can't also be affecting the first one. Like, let's say we wanted to have, here, let's assign these edges here to this vertex group, make this a cloth object, pin those sides here. Let's say we've got this cloth right here, and we have a rigid body cube. Make it active. If we hit play, they each do their own separate thing, unaware of the other one. We can have the cloth affect the cube. If we make this a rigid body object too, we keep it active, we say it's not dynamic, but it is animated, and the shape is the mesh in its final form. That should work. Okay, and the reason I was having trouble figuring this out is because you have to literally check this box after the simulation has already started for it to work. It doesn't matter which way you start it, you just have to toggle it. So yeah, just don't try to combine them. If you really have to, soft bodies kind of walk the line between a cloth sim and a rigid body, but we're not going to get into soft bodies today. However, we are going to get into force fields, because that's the one thing that can affect everything. When the car is driving around in the courtyard, you can see it's actually displacing air and blowing the curtains up and kind of disturbing them a little bit, which I thought was a pretty cool effect. And so let's do the same thing here. And what's nice is that it will also affect these wind chimes I just added, which we're going to do at the end of the video. We're going to make some wind chimes. We're going to use some rigid body constraints. It's going to be very fun. But yeah, let's add that force field. And if you've ever had a big truck drive by you, you know usually the wind doesn't hit you until like a couple seconds later. So let's hit Shift A, create a force field here, and I'm going to put it just slightly behind the car and parent it to the car. And actually, I keep running into so many different bugs while doing these experiments. I think rigid bodies are a little bit overlooked by the development team sometimes because, for example, a force-type force field I don't think affects cloth in Blender 4.0 and on. I've got to file a bug report and look into that. But it does in Blender 3. Whatever, and so that's where I'm at right now. But yeah, under the force field settings, let's go to maximum distance and change that to like maybe 5 meters. I'm gonna change the strength to like 1,000, and let's see what that does. That's actually pretty cool for the cloth, but it's it's pretty wild for the wind chimes. So what I'm gonna do is bake the cloth first here under the simulation start. And one thing I like to do when I'm baking is you'll notice when we start the simulation, it kind of settles for a while. And that's okay because we're not even really going to be starting the shot until probably right here when it's fairly settled. But if I wanted the shot to start on frame 0, you could have the simulation start on like -100, which means by frame 0 everything's kind of settled okay. But yeah, in this case this is all right. So yeah, now that the physics for the cloth are locked in, we can dial in the force field to for something that makes more sense for the wind chimes. There's other ways to fine tune too. Like if you go down under field weights, you can actually pick a collection that has all of the force fields you want to apply to the cloth, which means you can have different force fields applying to different physics systems and all of that. But in this case, it's nice to know that this cloth is taken care of and I don't have to think about it anymore. We're clipping a little bit. I could activate self collisions, but I'm just not gonna worry about that. If we set this to 5, let's see what that does. Oh, that works great. That's gonna be nice and noisy. All right, so I will see you at the end of the video to make a wind chime, I guess. All right. So failing in making a proper physics video, let's see if we can put these sticks into our little stick monster. So let's download it. We'll do the OBJ. And here's my scene right here. And the way I actually set it up, you'll notice first, I didn't really get it set up great. Again, rigid body physics don't want to be calculating thin little things. And so for whatever reason, a lot of things are kind of floating. I also turned gravity way down because the way this works is I have this body mesh here using some Rococo mocap data. And I have this set up with a force field here. So that it's actually every point, every vertex in the mesh is applying a -500 strength, which means it's trying to suck things in, which meant I had to make the mesh really low poly because basically each one of these points is its own force field, and that makes things very slow, especially when you have like 1,000 little sticks going on. So yeah, as I turn up the strength of that and the max distance of the force field, all of the other little sticks are sucked in to be a part of that. Which is kind of cool, and I probably should have like refined the simulation and done it a few more times, but it takes a very long time to calculate, and so I just kind of decided to run with it. But the way I set all of this up is, obviously if you've been using Blender for a little bit, you know that if you hit Shift-D, these are two separate versions of the object. But if you hit Alt-D, it's just another instance of the same thing. So if we tab in, you can see we can affect both of these at once. So all of these sticks are secretly the same like 12 sticks over and over. So my plan is to replace those placeholder sticks with my actual photo scan sticks and see if we can't cause Blender to crash. The only thing I want to see is the backup sticks. And if we adjust these sticks, that should update all of the sticks in the entire scene because they're all just instances of this. So let's import our OBJ sticks. There we go. Gonna go into local view here, turn on the material preview. And this isn't a great scan. Normally I'd put like a light on my camera to fill in the shadows and all of that, but in this case, I think it'll all work fine. Like you can see there's a lot of natural outdoor lighting baked in. The sun was over here. Not that we get sun in Seattle, but the gray does have a brighter side and a darker side. I'm gonna create a cube down here and scale it down and position it so that it's intersecting the stump in the right way, just leaving me with just the sticks. I have Bool Tool enabled so I can select this, then shift click on this, control negative on the numpad, and it performs a Boolean modifier operation automatically, which I can apply right now. Delete the old Boolean object, select these sticks. I'm gonna select all the sticks I like, select all the linked, and control I to invert the selection, delete these extra pieces, hit A, P, separate by loose parts, go back into object mode, right click, set the origin to geometry, so each one is in its middle here. And if we go back over here, let's scale these up and position them and try to match them to these other sticks. So now I'm going to select the real stick, select the old placeholder stick, and hit Control J to join them into the same object. Then I just tab into edit mode and delete the placeholder, and I'm going to do that for all of them. Cool, it looks like I accidentally had these sticks doubled up, so this one's extra, but it's a nice straight one, so I'll keep it around. I'm gonna save this as a different version now, just in case when we switch to the other stick monster now full of oodles of geometry, it suddenly explodes and is very unhappy. So let's call it Awakens in Hall Stickified, yeah. If we turn off backup sticks and turn on animated sticks, ooh, it actually works and it's not super crazy. How's it look? How's it render? Okay, yeah, no, this looks really good. It looks like maybe I used the same stick over and over and over for the head? Or is that, no, it's just because we're looking at the ends of all of them. That's kind of cool. In fact, let's tweak this a little bit. I'm gonna plug the color down into the normal here through a bump map. Everything's lagging a little bit because I do have a lot of objects in the scene, which is the one thing Blender never really likes. But here, let's say 0.05. Does that do anything? Turn the strength down, play with a specular a little bit. All right, so the last thing I could do, I didn't know whether I wanted to keep the floor just scattered like this, or if I wanted to make it dirt, or if I actually just wanted to make it pure sticks, just a pure layer of sticks. I think I want to do that, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the, go to the backup sticks here, select all of them, duplicate them, bring them into a new thing that's just called floor, turn off everything else, duplicate all of these around, just make a big old kind of mess with it. I'm trying to make just like a little specific pile that I could use over and over. Now turn on proportional editing and set it to random. I'm gonna select a stick and just rotate, and that'll rotate all the other sticks kind of randomly. You can see we're getting nice good randomness here. In fact, let's scale them up a little bit too. I think he's gonna be made out of some of the smaller sticks. But yeah, if we have this going on, and then let's duplicate everything, rotate it around, get it a little bit denser. Blender, it's great. Has computers are fine handling like a million instances of one thing. If these were all different sticks, Blender would be like, what are you trying to do? But this is, it knows this is just like 10 different sticks with the same material. And so this is actually pretty easy. But now that we have all of these down here in the floor collection, make sure they're in there. We can turn off floor, turn on our other ones again, and we can create an instance of floor like this. Make sure it's just barely intersecting with, here, we'll turn off proportional editing. Make sure it's just barely intersecting with the floor, and we should just be able to kind of rotate and tile them around, and Blender shouldn't put up too much of a fuss about having like thousands of sticks down here. Now we'll lower down the original floor under all these new sticks a little bit. And there was something kind of stark and more easily readable about seeing it on the bare floor before, as opposed to like, you know, the big floor of sticks. But I think I might try rendering out a version like this too, just because I think it might hide some of my crimes, honestly. If I offset the lights here, the further the lights get away from the camera, the more distinct this shadow will be here. So the more you'll be able to read the perspective of this sticking up from the ground. But I think this might actually kind of already be working. Oh, that looks kind of cool. If we added some volumetrics to that too, is just looking up into the beam of light, that would be kind of rad. But here, let's try selecting the big wooden floor. Yeah, there we go, and just raising it up just a little bit and seeing if we can kind of just introduce a little bit of that background feeling. I don't know, what do you think? Maybe we split the difference and just delete the floor chunks that are directly underneath it. And I'm going to duplicate this light right here, make it even brighter over here in the shader editor. Look at it, like a value of 2,000. But I'm going to turn the spot size way down because I only want it hitting the face of the weird guy. Maybe turn it back down just a little bit. Ooh, but ooh, yeah, okay. What if I did? It would make everything render a lot fast or a lot slower. But what if I did put a little bit of volumetrics down there? Not close to the light because we're right next to a spotlight, and it would kind of like get hard to render probably. Although it seems to be doing okay. But just actually down here in the hole. Basically, if I make the haze dense enough, you can actually get a sense of depth just from like the head sticking out of it and being more clear. But I think that might be a little bit ridiculous. But let's try splitting the difference a tad. Yeah, that's cool. And I think I'm happy with this animation, except if you look at the head's motion, it's kind of jittering a lot because it's extrapolating a lot. It's attaching a large thing to a small bone on the mocap. But we can fix that. Normally it's kind of hard to maybe fix that in mocap, but in this case, this is parented to that head bone. I'm gonna go into Object, Animation, Bake Action, just bake it for all of this, visual keying, clear constraints, clear parents. Take a second to do that. And now that it's baked, we can go into the graph editor here, and here's its motion. You can see it's a little bit kind of jittery. If we hit Alt-0, we can smooth everything out, because the bigger something is, usually the less jittery it is. It kind of has enough inertia to operate fairly smooth. Actually, it's Alt-O, although I don't know why keyboard manufacturers put the two circles of the 0 and the O right next to each other. So now it feels a little bit more weighty, and we could do that. Again, all these other bones are also baked, so we could smooth out some of the more jittery ones. But in general, I think a lot of them I kind of like. And maybe I'll give him little ears, like little kind of a stick coming out of each side of his head, like tiny little antlers. And yeah, all right, I'm gonna start a render and go see my friend at the local pub. Hello, this is Scott Kirby.
Seasick crocodile.
This is actually very good. Do it.
The flour allows the fat and the water to combine because fat and water won't mix normally. And then
Dashing through the snow in a one horse open sleigh. Over the fields we go, laughing all the way. Little sun about to rain, making spirits bright. They'll never catch me. And the render's done. So here we go. I think this edit works pretty good. I'm trying to figure out, so at the end, you see the monster suddenly scurry off, and he kind of throws himself back, and I want there to be one final shot of the monster, of it crawling out of the hole. And originally it was going to be moving really, really fast, but I also kind of like the idea now, just one hand comes up, and we've got the mocap, we've got kind of like the idea of the hand grabbing, and you get all the sticks kind of like intersecting with the, I think it could be a fun thing. So we'll figure out what feels right. And okay, let's make a Windchime. Gonna save first and foremost because Blender's crashing a lot working with these rigid body physics. The bells. Remember, a person is about this tall, so we probably want our chime to be, you know, that tall, and we want to model everything to scale. So let's get started here. I'm just gonna model all of the base shapes first, and then we'll figure out how to rig it. So let's do a round thing on top, or do we want to do? We could do two separate ones. Yeah, let's do a cube. Instead of scaling in object mode, I'm gonna scale in edit mode so that I don't have to keep applying the scale. So this will be like this. We'll pull this one up to there. Maybe scale it down a little bit. And yeah, maybe we'll have two kind of hanging off of the same thing, kind of like a mobile. Ooh, yeah, we should do. Let's do a mobile. I'm gonna duplicate this and scale it down. Apply that scale. Move this over here. And the location of the origin in the object is important, that little orange dot, because that is, again, going to be the center of gravity, which it feels even more important when you're doing a thing with a bunch of constraints and all of that. Let's make a little holder up at the top. This will be kind of the bracket. And maybe a little string here, turn on the number of vertices here. Although I want to keep it so they're not fully intersecting. There's probably ways to make that not really matter, but in this case it'll make our life easier. So let's create another cylinder. And let's model one bell. I'm kind of just modeling one of every part, really. Be sure to save, and maybe we'll duplicate this bell, scale it down, apply the scale, and have it down here too. And by now you know we can select an object, go into the physics tab, say rigid body, you know, add all of that. But I'm just going to select everything, hit F3, and say add active under the rigid body thing here, and that makes all of them rigid body objects. For the cylinders, I'm going to change the shape to the primitive that best describes it, because I think that's just slightly more efficient. And I'm also going to select all of the other cylinders too, and copy those same settings with F3, copy rigid body settings. Oh, you'll notice one weird thing here. So the collision domain stays centered around the origin of the object, no matter where this is. So we're going to keep the geometry there too. Or you can just right click and say set origin to geometry, and it's all centered again. So put that back there. But okay, now the fun part, or the tedious part. How do we get this to actually Windchime? I'm going to select the very top piece and change it to passive, because when the simulation starts, I don't want it to go anywhere. And I think in theory you can apply a rigid body constraint straight to the object, but I think also it uses the object's origin as the hinge point, but also using the origin as the center of gravity. And so if you wanted the pendulum to swing around its origin up there, like, it all gets really confused. And so instead we're going to use a separate object. We're going to use an empty. Let's hit Shift S, cursor to selection. I'm going to put an empty right in the middle there just to keep everything centered. I'm going to scale it down and apply the scale just in case it matters. Put it up here in this passive object, and that'll be our hinge point. And we're going to use this empty to host the constraint. So we click rigid body. And sorry, my face is blocking the button. Hopefully it's obvious from context. I set everything up right, but then Blender crashes a million times and I have to switch to other versions of Blender. I forget to set it up again or something because I'm in the zone. I don't know. So we click rigid body constraint. We're going to change it to point, which means it's just rotating around a central point. Actually, all of these are kind of fun. Fixed just means it's literally locked in place as if they're the same object. The benefit is that there's a threshold for them being connected, which means if you have it like being part of a brick wall, you can have a car burst through it, and if it has enough energy, it'll actually smash the wall open. But in this case, we want it to be a point. Hinge just lets it rotate on one axis. Slider lets it move along. You know, it's cool. It's cool stuff. But yeah, let's use point. I'm going to select one object and the other. We're not actually parenting the objects to each other. We're letting the constraint do all of the work. I'm going to hit save before I ever hit play, just because, yeah, all right, there we go. There we go. That's working great. And is this actually doing anything? Here, I'm going to create another force field of wind and just set it up so it's blowing in from the side. And let's see if this swings a little bit. It does, great, okay. So I'm gonna keep adding these constraints. In fact, I think I can just duplicate this one, move it down, and reset up what these objects are. And I don't know if it even matters what order they're in, which means this cylinder is already selected, so I can just change this from this one to here. And all right. And yeah, remember, you're placing the empty at where you want it to rotate around. Like if there were a string being tied on, this is where the string would be tied. Great. And oh, just grab this one last bell too. Okay, I've got a confession. Rigid bodies are way cooler than I thought. I thought it was just kind of good for making boxes bounce around at some silly thing from the early thousands, but they're really powerful, especially with these constraints. And there's easier ways to kind of do everything too. So to do a mini tutorial and a larger tutorial, which I should really learn not to do. Here, let's select all of these, hit F3. Add active. Let's select this one, say add passive. We can select all of these and say F3 connect rigid bodies. This gives us a bunch. Look, it just does it. And you can say chain by distance, which means it kind of just intuitively puts them all in order. We're going to change the point to Yeah, point. By default, it's putting the location in the center of each object. I might move this up to be at the top, so it's in between each object instead. And we can do the exact same thing here. Connect. And for this one, I'm going to change it to selected to active and just bring all these back up here too. And ideally, here we can turn up the wind here. Here we'll give it a little turbulence to kind of show that each of the bells are actually doing it. See, that's the tutorial, Ian. That's the tutorial. Gosh darn it. And what's cool about setting this up the way that we did is you can copy and paste this stuff. Here I'm going to use Alt-D, and it'll copy the constraint too, and just direct it to the new object. So here, if we grab all of these, duplicate it over, hit play. Yeah, there we go. And so if we snap our cursor here, Shift S cursor to selected, grab the constraint and the bell here, and in the top view, we changed our rotation point to 3D cursor. We can rotate this 180 degrees, and then duplicate them again. Alt-D, RZ 90, and let's do the last one. AD, RZ 45. And now we have a very side-heavy wind chime until we grab all of this stuff, Alt-D, slide it over to the other side, and let's see how balanced it is. Oh, it's beautiful. It's art. I do want it to not be as wiggly. First thing I'm gonna do is make sure I actually have the scale applied to everything. If I hit Alt-S, it looks like a lot of these tubes get bigger, which I think could throw things off. And since all of these are sharing object data, if we hit Control-A and try to apply the scale, it goes, whoa, and it's gonna try to make it its own instance. But if we hit Shift-L, select linked by object data, then we have all of them at once, and we can hit Control-A and apply the scale, and it doesn't put up a fuss. Let's see if that makes it a little more stable. It doesn't. Okay, so my guess is because of some intersection, something's fighting something else just perpetually. So I'm gonna add slightly more gaps between everything else and see if that makes it a little less jittery. It all seems stable except for these tubes. Let's see. If I select the constraint controlling this top bit here and change it from point to fixed so it can't swivel around, I wonder if that would make it a little bit more stable. It doesn't. Let's go under the rigid body settings here. Let's check split impulse, see if that fixes it. Let's try turning up these settings instead. Interesting, that seems to make it worse. What if we turn down the speed? It's slower, but no better. Also, I should have been talking about this the whole time, but you can set the weight of each object, which is probably pretty important. By default, everything is set to weigh 1 kilogram, which is 2 pounds, and considering a brick weighs like 4 pounds, which is 2 kilograms, kind of, I'm like, all right, what would anything here weigh relative to half a brick? So maybe 0.2 kilograms, and then we'll hit Shift-L, select object data, F3, copy rigid body settings. If I delete the bells, does it stable up? Seems to. What if we use 6 bells instead of 8? No. I'm gonna try moving the constraints to be a little bit lower, and the other constraints to be a little bit higher. Well, conceptually it's straightforward. Let me figure this out. Got it. It was don't set the shape to cylinder. I think sometimes that's probably the best option, but in this case, I changed everything back to convex hull, and look at this. So stable. We can add our force field wind going that way with a lot of noise. Turn up the strength. Oh, beautiful chimes. So I'll set up another rigid body, make it passive and animated. I think if it's animated, it doesn't really matter if it's active or passive, because again, since you're keyframing it, you're saying where it is anyways. But let's see. Yeah! So we will copy and paste this into our other scene. Hopefully it's at some sort of reasonable scale. I'll add a little bar kind of sticking out off of the front here that these guys are mounted onto. Wait, now it seems too stable. Oh, it's because I set all of the constraints to be fixed when I was troubleshooting. Dang, it's still stable though. More stable than the other guys. Here, let's give them all the convex hull treatment too. Oh yeah, that's great. I could probably balance out the bells to reduce some of that wiggle. And again, if I set up the rigid bodies, in fact, let's just do it right now. Gonna reset these here. I'm gonna have the simulation start at -100, go to frame 300, hit bake. So you can see it starts all the way at -300, but we're only gonna be able to see it starting on frame 100. So yeah, that's nice and steady in general. That one's a little crazy. That's okay. Delete the bake. Find our little force field here, because it wasn't as strong as I thought it was, because it was actually all these little boxes down here smashing up into the wind chimes that made it look like what I thought was the effect the force field had. So let's turn this down to 350. Final bake. This is the one. It's a nice little wind chime hut, and then oh, that's great. That's great. And what's really fun is none of the bells are intersecting. Like, they're all actually doing what they should be doing. All right, well, this video's gone on long enough, covered enough ground. Next video, I'll show you the final result. I think I want to add like a bell chime monger who's got like a headpiece covered in little bells, and they'll be like, hell's bells. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna finish editing this and go to bed. But first, I did a little preview render, and it's looking good. I think it's gonna work in the edit, especially with the voiceover stuff that's gonna be going on too. I think it's gonna be funny. All right, now I'm going to bed. I will talk to you soon. Have a good one.